The sleet in Philadelphia did not fall so much as it was driven, like nails hammered against the thin glass of the boarding house window. It was November of 1878, and the city was a gray, industrial bruise under a weeping sky. Inside the room, which smelled of damp wool and coal dust, Clara Hayes sat on the edge of her narrow cot, the newspaper spread across her knees, her fingers, roughened by needlework, traced the lines of ink that promised a salvation she did not truly believe in but could no longer live without. Wyoming territory, a respectable home, a kind husband. The words seemed to float above the paper, detached from reality. To a woman of 24 who had seen her life dismantled by rumors and the cruelty of a man she had foolishly trusted. They read less like an advertisement and more like a fairy tale written for children. But fairy tales were all she had left. Downstairs, the heavy tread of Mrs. Gable, her landlady and employer, shook the floorboards. Clara flinched. Earlier that afternoon, Mrs. Gable had cornered her in the sewing room, her mouth set in a grim line as she held up a silk bodice Clara had been hemming. The conversation had not been about the stitching. It had been about the gentleman who had come in for a fitting for his wife, the one who had lingered too long by Clara's chair, his hand brushing her shoulder in a way that made her skin crawl. "You should be grateful a man of means even looks at you," Mrs. Gable had sneered, her voice low and poisonous. "With your history, Clara, you are hardly in a position to be high and mighty. If you turn away paying customers because you think you are too good to be pleasant, you can find another roof for your head." Clara closed her eyes, the shame burning hot in her chest despite the chill in the room. It was always the history. It followed her like a stain that no amount of scrubbing could lift. She remembered the way Arthur had looked at her 2 years ago, with eyes that seemed to promise the world. He had been handsome, older, and, she found out too late, married with 3 children in a townhouse on the other side of the city. When his wife found the letters, Arthur had not defended Clara. He had called her a temptress, a confused girl who had thrown herself at him. The city, hungry for scandal, had believed him. Since then, she had been nothing more than the girl who had fallen. Friends crossed the street to avoid her. Her mother, widowed and living on a meager pension in a crumbling house 10 miles away, took Clara's money but never looked her in the eye. Clara looked back at the advertisement. Milton Crane, Red Butte, Wyoming, general store owner. She pulled a sheet of paper from under her pillow. Her inkwell was nearly dry, but she dipped the pen, her hand trembling. She had to leave. If she stayed here, she would starve, or she would be forced into the kind of life Mrs. Gable hinted at, a life where her body was currency and her soul was forfeit. "Dear Mr. Crane," she wrote, the scratch of the nib loud in the silence. "I have read your advertisement with great interest. I am a hard-working woman of good health and Christian upbringing. I can cook, sew, and keep a clean house. I seek a quiet life and a partnership built on mutual respect." She paused, the ink pooling slightly. She did not mention Arthur. She did not mention the whispers. She did not mention that she was terrified. "I am ready to travel immediately," she finished. "Yours truly, Clara Hayes." She folded the letter before she could lose her nerve. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the loose sash of the window. It sounded like a warning, but Clara stood up and reached for her coat. She had $3 saved in a tin under her bed. It was enough for postage and a portion of the ticket. The rest, Milton Crane had promised to send upon receipt of a favorable reply. She was selling herself. She knew that. She was trading her labor and her loyalty for a roof that did not leak and a name that was not ruined. It was a transaction, and she prayed, as she walked out into the biting sleet, that she was getting the better end of the bargain. The journey west was a slow dismantling of the world as Clara knew it. The train ride from the East Coast to the railhead was a blur of soot, rattling metal, and the smell of unwashed bodies. For days, she sat upright on hard wooden benches, watching the landscape shift through the dirty glass. The dense, vertical forests of the East gave way to the rolling green of the Midwest, which in turn surrendered to the endless, aching brown of the plains. The further west they went, the smaller Clara felt. In Philadelphia, the buildings crowded out the sky, making the world feel close and contained. Here, the sky was a terrifying, open thing that seemed ready to swallow the train whole. There were hours where they saw nothing but grass and the occasional herd of buffalo, moving like a dark river across the earth. At the railhead, the train stopped, but the journey did not. Clara, stiff and exhausted, transferred to a stagecoach that looked as if it had been built before the war. It was painted a peeling red, and the leather springs groaned under the weight of the luggage strapped to the roof. She shared the interior with 3 other passengers. One was a whiskey salesman with a red nose and a suit that shined with grease at the elbows. Another was a severe older woman traveling to live with her son, clutching a Bible like a weapon. The third was a young man who slept with his hat pulled over his eyes, smelling faintly of sawdust. The salesman, whose name was Mr. Pellinor, spent the first 50 miles trying to engage Clara in conversation. "You are heading to Red Butte," he said, his eyes roaming over her travel-stained dress. "That is a rough patch of country for a lady alone. Not much there but wind and rock." "I am meeting my husband," Clara said, the lie tasting like copper in her mouth. She was not married yet, not technically. "Husband?" he repeated, leaning back with a smirk. "Lucky man. Bringing a flower to the desert." Clara turned her face to the window and did not speak to him again. The days in the stagecoach were brutal. The road was little more than a pair of ruts cut into the hard earth. Every rock and pothole sent a jolt up Clara's spine. Dust, fine and powdery, found its way through every crack in the door, settling in the creases of her clothes, coating her tongue, stinging her eyes. It was a dry, alkaline dust that sucked the moisture right out of her skin. By the 4th day, the landscape had changed again. They had left the flat plains and entered a region of high desert and broken foothills. The earth was red here, the color of dried blood, and the vegetation was sparse. Twisted sagebrush, prickly pear cactus, and stunted juniper trees that clung to the rock like desperate men. The driver, a man wrapped in a buffalo coat despite the sun, shouted at the team of 6 horses, his whip cracking like a pistol shot. "We are making good time," the salesman announced. "Checking a pocket watch. We should make the station by supper." He was wrong. An hour later, the sky bruised purple in the west, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in the span of 10 minutes. A winter squall, common in the high country, swept down from the mountains. It did not snow, but it rained. A freezing driving rain that turned the road into a slurry of thick, clinging mud. The stagecoach slowed to a crawl. The wheels, caked in clay, became heavy discs that the horses struggled to turn. Clara could hear the animals blowing hard, their hooves sucking at the mire. Then came the crack. It was a sharp, sickening sound, like a bone snapping. The coach lurched violently to the left. Clara was thrown against the severe woman, who gasped and dropped her Bible. The world tilted, and for a terrifying second, Clara thought they would roll over into the ravine that ran alongside the road. The coach slammed to a halt, leaning precariously. "Everyone out," the driver roared from above. "Wheel is done for." Clara pushed open the heavy door and stepped out. Her boots sank 6 inches into the freezing mud. The wind hit her instantly, cutting through her thin wool coat as if it were made of lace. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. The left rear wheel had shattered, the spokes were splintered, and the rim was bent almost in half. The driver was already on the ground, cursing a steady stream of blasphemy as he inspected the damage. "We cannot fix this here," the driver shouted over the wind. "Axle is sitting in the mud. We have got to lighten the load if we want to drag her to the turnout up ahead. Everyone walks." "Walk," the salesman spluttered, clutching his sample case. "In this muck, it is a mile to the turnout. Walk or freeze," the driver said, spitting tobacco juice into the rain. Clara looked at the road ahead. It was a ribbon of gray sludge winding up a steep rise. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her cheeks. She was hungry, she was exhausted, and she was 400 miles from anything that resembled civilization. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden, but she bit her lip until the pain grounded her. She would not cry. She had come this far. She began to walk. The mud was heavy, clinging to her skirts, adding pounds to every step. The salesman and the young man went ahead, struggling for footing. The older woman took the driver's arm. Clara fell behind, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her chest burned with the cold air. She had walked perhaps a quarter of a mile when she heard the sound of hooves. It was not the rhythmic clatter of carriage horses, but the slower, heavier plodding of working animals. She stopped and wiped the rain from her eyes. Coming down the rise toward them was a group of riders. There were 4 of them, driving a small herd of cattle that looked as miserable as Clara felt. The cows were lowing, their heads down against the wind. The riders wore long slickers and wide-brimmed hats that funneled the rain away from their faces. One of the riders broke away from the group and trotted toward the stranded stagecoach passengers. He pulled his horse up a few yards from Clara. The animal was a big bay, steaming in the cold air, its nostrils flaring red. The rider sat easy in the saddle, as if he were part of the horse. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, wearing a duster that had seen better years. He looked down at Clara, and she felt a sudden, irrational desire to hide her muddy boots. "Need a hand, ma'am?" he asked. His voice was gravel, low and rough, like stones grinding together in a riverbed. It was not a loud voice, but it cut through the wind with no effort. Clara looked up, under the brim of his hat. His face was a map of the country they were traveling through, hard, weathered, and tanned to the color of old saddle leather. He had a dark beard, kept short, and a scar that ran from his jawline down into the collar of his shirt, white and jagged. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, set deep under heavy brows, and they looked at her not with the predatory assessment of the salesman or the judgment of Mrs. Gable, but with a quiet, weary clarity. "I'm fine," Clara lied, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. The cowboy did not smile. He looked at her shaking hands, then at her boots buried in the mud. He shifted his weight, and leather creaked. "You are turning blue, ma'am," he said. He swung a leg over the saddle horn and dropped to the ground. He landed softly for a big man, his boots squelching in the mud. He was taller than he looked on the horse. He unknotted the bandana from around his neck, a faded red piece of cloth that looked clean but worn. "Here," he said, holding it out. "Tie this over your head. That bonnet is not doing you any favors against this wind." Clara hesitated. The bandana was warm from his skin. She reached out, her fingers brushing his as she took the cloth. A shock went through her. It was not the romantic thrill she had read about in penny novels. It was something more primal, a sudden awareness of heat and solidity in a world that was entirely cold and fluid. His hand was rough, calloused and scarred, but his touch was incredibly gentle. Their eyes met again. For a second, the wind seemed to drop away. He was looking at her, really looking at her, seeing the fear she was trying to hide and the exhaustion she could not disguise. There was no pity in his face, only a kind of recognition, as if he knew exactly what it felt like to be stuck in the mud 1,000 miles from home. "Thank you," Clara whispered. He nodded once, touching the brim of his hat. "Name is Eli," he said. "Eli Mercer." He turned away before she could introduce herself, walking toward the stagecoach driver to offer the help of his rope and horse. Clara stood there in the rain, clutching the warm red cloth, and watched him go. She tied the bandana over her sodden bonnet, pulling it tight under her chin. It smelled of tobacco, horse sweat, and rain. It smelled like safety. Red Butte was not a town. It was a scar on the landscape. They arrived at dusk, the stagecoach limping in on its jury-rigged wheel. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of bruised purple and a biting cold that settled in the marrow of Clara's bones. Clara looked out the window as they rolled down the main street. There were no gas lamps, only the flickering orange glow of lanterns hanging outside rough-hewn buildings. The structures were unpainted wood, gray and warped by the sun and wind. There was a saloon, its windows bright and noisy, a livery stable that smelled of manure, and a single church with a steeple that looked like it was leaning away from the prevailing wind. The ground was red dust, currently turned to red paste by the rain. There were no trees, no gardens, no softness anywhere. It looked temporary, as if a strong enough gust would blow the entire settlement into the next territory. "This is it," the salesman said, sounding relieved. The coach groaned to a halt in front of a building with a false front. The sign above the door read, "Crane's General Mercantile Dry Goods." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She smoothed her skirts, trying to brush away the dried mud, but it was hopeless. She looked like a beggar. The driver opened the door. "End of the line, folks." Clara stepped down onto the boardwalk. The wood was slick. A few men were loitering under the overhang, smoking pipes. They stopped talking as she descended, their eyes tracking her movement. "At the mail-order wife," one of them muttered. "Looks scrawny," another said, followed by a low chuckle. Clara kept her chin high, staring straight ahead. The door to the mercantile opened, and a man stepped out. It had to be Milton Crane. He was shorter than she had imagined from his letters. He wrote with a large, looping script that suggested a man of expansive personality. But in the flesh, Milton was narrow. He was a man in his late 40s, perhaps 50, with thinning brown hair plastered to his skull and a face that seemed pinched, as if he smelled something sour. He wore a clean suit, but the cuffs were frayed. He stood on the boardwalk, looking down at her. He did not smile. He did not offer a hand. He scanned her from the top of her bandana-covered head to the tips of her muddy boots. It was the look a man might give a sack of flour he suspected had been infested with weevils. "Miss Hayes," he said. His voice was high and reedy. "Mr. Crane," Clara said. She tried to curtsy, but her knees were too stiff. He stepped closer, invading her space. He smelled of peppermint and stale wool. "You are late," he said. "The stage was due 4 hours ago." "There was an accident," Clara explained, her voice trembling slightly. "The wheel broke. We had to walk." Milton made a noise in his throat, a sharp click of annoyance. He reached out and took her chin in his hand, turning her face to the light of the lantern. His fingers were cold and dry. "You looked younger in the tintype you sent," he said accusingly. "It was taken last year," Clara said, her face burning. "Letters can flatter," Milton said, dropping his hand. "And pictures can lie. Well, you are here now. No sense sending you back. Cost me $40 for the ticket." He turned to the men loitering nearby. "Grabbed her trunk," he ordered them. "Put it in the back." He turned back to Clara. "Come along. The clerk at the courthouse is waiting. I paid him $2 to stay late, and I do not intend to pay him more." Clara felt a cold sensation in her stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. This was it. This was the respectable home. This was the kind husband. She followed him. The courthouse was a grand name for a 2-room shack with a pot-belly stove in the corner. The clerk was a man with ink-stained fingers and a wandering eye who looked as if he wanted to be anywhere else. 2 men from the saloon had been dragged in as witnesses. They leaned against the wall, smelling of whiskey, snickering into their hands as Milton read the vows. "Do you, Clara Hayes, take this man?" the clerk droned. Clara looked at Milton. He was checking his pocket watch. "I do," she whispered. She signed the ledger. The pen scratched loudly. When she set it down, she felt a heavy finality settle over her, like a prison door clanging shut. She was no longer Clara Hayes. She was Clara Crane. The past was gone. Yes, but the future looked like a long, dark tunnel. Milton leaned in. "You may kiss the bride," the clerk mumbled. Milton pressed his lips to hers. They were dry and thin, and the kiss lasted exactly 1 second. It possessed no warmth, no affection, not even possessiveness. It was a stamp of ownership. "A receipt." "Let us go," Milton said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "There is work to do in the morning." The room above the store was small and smelled of dust. The ceiling sloped sharply on one side, following the roofline. There was a narrow iron bed, a washstand with a cracked pitcher, and a single window that rattled in its frame. Milton set the candle on the washstand. The flame flickered in the draught. "This is your home now." "Clara," he said. He stood by the door, his hands clasped behind his back. "I expect it to be kept clean. I am a man of order." "Yes, Milton," Clara said. She was still wearing her coat. It was freezing in the room. "We open the store at 7, Milton said, reciting a list he had clearly rehearsed. "You will be up at 5. You will sweep the floors, dust the shelves, and have breakfast on the table by 6:30. During the day, you will mind the counter when I'm at the bank or the depot. You will be polite to customers, but not familiar. A woman's reputation is her husband's business, and I will not have loose behavior in my shop." He paused, looking at her with those pinching, calculating eyes. "And regarding the evenings," he added, his voice dropping a register, "becoming colder. I expect obedience. I am the head of this house. My word is law. Do you understand?" "I understand," Clara said. Her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. "Good," Milton said. He turned to leave. "I sleep in the back room downstairs. You will sleep here. I value my rest, and I am a light sleeper. Do not disturb me unless the building is on fire." He stepped out and closed the door. Clara heard the heavy slide of a bolt. She stood alone in the center of the room. She did not take off her coat. She sat on the edge of the iron bed, the mattress groaning under her weight. The wind outside picked up, scraping granules of red dust against the exterior walls. It sounded like sandpaper. It sounded like something trying to get in. She reached up and touched the bandana that was still tied around her neck. She pulled it loose, running the red fabric through her fingers. It was the only thing in this town that felt real. She blew out the candle and lay down in the dark, listening to the wind and the silence of the man she had married sleeping below her. She did not cry. She was past crying. She simply lay there and wondered how a life could end while she was still breathing. Across the street, in the shadow of the livery stable, a horse shifted and stamped a hoof. Eli Mercer sat on his bay gelding, watching the window above the general store. He had seen the light flicker and go out. He pulled the collar of his duster up around his ears. The wind was biting tonight. He should be back at the ranch. The boys were probably already playing cards in the bunkhouse, the stove glowing red. But he had ridden back into town after dropping the herd, telling the foreman he needed tobacco. He didn't need tobacco. He remembered the woman from the stagecoach. He remembered the way she had looked standing in the mud, small, shivering, but with a jaw set like granite. She hadn't complained. She hadn't wept. She had just looked at him with those wide, terrified eyes and taken his bandana. He had seen her go into the courthouse with Milton Crane. Everyone in town knew Milton. Everyone knew he was a man who counted every penny and every slight. He was a man who squeezed the life out of things. Eli watched the dark window for a long moment. He felt a tightness in his chest, a strange, heavy pull that he hadn't felt in years. It was concern. Yes, but it was edged with something sharper. Anger, maybe, or regret. He shouldn't care. She was a stranger. She was a mail-order bride, and she had made her choice. It was none of his business, but he remembered the warmth of her fingers when they brushed his. Eli spat into the dirt. He turned the bay horse away from the store, toward the dark road that led out to the ranch. "Do not be a fool, Mercer," he muttered to himself. He dug his spurs in gently, and the horse broke into a trot, the sound of hooves swallowed by the howling wind. Above the store, the window remained dark, holding its secrets tight against the cold Wyoming night. The routine of Red Butte ground Clara down with the slow, unyielding pressure of a millstone. November bled into December, bringing with it a sky the color of iron and a wind that never ceased its scouring of the earth. Clara's days began in the pitch black of 5 o'clock in the morning, long before the sun crested the eastern ridges. The air in the unheated upstairs room was so cold that the water in the pitcher would often have a skin of ice that she had to crack with her knuckles. She would dress in the dark, her fingers stiff and clumsy on the buttons of her calico dress. Shivering violently, until she made it downstairs to the kitchen at the back of the store. There, the cast-iron stove waited like a sullen beast, demanding coal that Milton rationed as if it were gold dust. Her hands, once soft from needlework, grew red and chapped. They bled around the cuticles from the harsh lye soap and the dry air. She hauled water from the pump behind the store, the buckets heavy enough to make her shoulders scream, the water sloshing over the rims to freeze instantly on her apron. She swept the rough plank floors of the mercantile, pushing clouds of red dust that seemed to regenerate the moment she turned her back. She stocked shelves with tins of beans, sacks of flour, and bolts of fabric, her eyes stinging from the grit. And then there were the books. Milton insisted she manage the ledger during the quiet hours of the afternoon. He would stand over her shoulder, smelling of stale tobacco and peppermint, watching her pen scratch across the paper. "You are wasting ink," he would snap, his voice sharp and thin. "Your loops are too wide. Write smaller. Clara, paper costs money." She would tighten her grip until her knuckles turned white, shrinking her handwriting until it was cramped and anxious, mirroring the feeling in her chest. The numbers rarely added up to Milton's satisfaction. The store was not doing well, anyone could see that, but Milton refused to accept his own failings as a businessman. It was the freight costs. He said it was the weather. It was the customers wanting credit they did not deserve. And now, increasingly, it was Clara's fault. If you had smiled at Mrs. Gable when she came in for ribbon, she would have bought 2 yards instead of 1, he told her one evening, examining the ledger with a frown. "You have a sour face. Clara, a shopkeeper's wife must be pleasant. You are driving trade away." It was a bitter accusation. Considering how the town treated her, Red Butte was a place of hard edges and harder judgments. To the women of the town, the wives of the ranchers, the church matrons, the few respectable ladies who held their heads high above the dust, Clara was a curiosity and a scandal. They knew she had come from a catalog. They knew Milton had paid for her ticket. To them, she was not a wife. She was a transaction. When Clara walked down the boardwalk to the butcher or the post office, conversation would wither and die as she passed, replaced by the rustle of whispers. "That is her," a woman in a heavy wool bonnet would murmur, hiding her mouth behind a gloved hand. "The Crane woman. Bought and paid for," another would giggle, the sound sharp and cruel. "I heard she has no family back east, likely ran away from trouble." Clara kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, walking with a brisk, efficient stride, clutching her basket like a shield. She learned to make herself deaf. She learned to stare at the red rock cliffs in the distance until the women's voices were nothing more than the buzzing of flies. The men were worse. The saloon, a ramshackle building owned by a man named Asa Briggs, sat directly across the street from the mercantile. During the day, men loitered on the porch, leaning against the posts, watching the street with bored, predatory eyes. Whenever Clara stepped out to sweep the boardwalk, she felt their gazes sticking to her. "Morning, Mrs. Crane," one would call out, dragging the title out in a way that made it sound like an insult. "Milton getting his money's worth? Looks like prime mail-order meat to me," another would say, loud enough for her to hear but quiet enough to claim innocence if challenged. Clara would sweep harder, the broom bristles scratching frantically against the wood, her face burning with a humiliation so deep it felt like a physical bruise. She never looked at them. She never spoke back. She simply swallowed the shame, tasting the copper tang of it, and went back inside to the dim, dusty safety of the store, where her husband waited to tell her she had missed a spot. Eli Mercer came into the store on Tuesdays and Fridays. He usually arrived in the late afternoon, when the winter sun was slanting long and gold through the dusty front windows. He came with the other hands from the Double Bar Ranch, men who stomped the snow off their boots and laughed loudly as they bought tobacco and ammunition. Eli was different. He moved with a quiet economy, as if he did not want to disturb the air around him. He would hang back near the stove or the hardware section, his hat pulled low, observing the room with those dark, heavy-lidded eyes. He never spoke to Clara beyond a polite nod or a murmured greeting. but she felt his presence the moment he walked through the door. It was a change in the atmospheric pressure of the room, a sudden gravity that pulled her attention even when she was trying to focus on weighing sugar or cutting fabric. He watched her. She knew that. And he watched Milton. One Tuesday in mid-December, Milton was in a foul mood. A shipment of dry goods had arrived damaged, and he had spent the morning pacing the aisles, muttering about thieves and incompetence. When Eli and two other cowboys entered, Milton was behind the counter, berating Clara for spilling a small amount of cornmeal while filling a sack. "Clumsy," Milton hissed, not caring that they had an audience. "Look at this waste. Do you think cornmeal falls from the sky? Woman, sweep it up, every grain." "I am sorry, Milton," Clara said softly, reaching for the dustpan. "My hand slipped." "Your hand is always slipping," Milton snapped. "You are as useful as a screen door on a submarine." Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a flush that spread down her neck. She crouched down to sweep the floor, wishing the floorboards would simply open up and swallow her whole. From the hardware aisle, Eli Mercer went very still. He was holding a coil of rope, testing its weight, but his eyes were fixed on Milton. His jaw tightened, the muscles bunching beneath the dark beard. He slowly set the rope down. He did not intervene. It was not his place. In the West, a man's business with his wife was his own, no matter how sour it tasted to watch. But as Clara stood up, dumping the dust into the bin, she caught Eli's eye. He was not looking at her with the leering amusement of the saloon men or the critical appraisal of the town women. He looked angry, but the anger was not directed at her. It was a small thing, that look, but to a woman starving for kindness, it was a feast. The incident that changed everything happened 3 days later. It was a day of ferocious wind. The glass in the front windows bowed inward with every gust, and the sign above the door creaked and groaned like a dying animal. The store was empty of customers. Milton was in the back office, counting cash, and Clara was restocking the high shelves behind the counter with heavy wooden crates of tinned peaches. She was standing on a stepladder, balancing a crate on her shoulder. It was too heavy for her. Milton knew it, but he had ordered her to do it anyway while he attended to important matters. As she lifted the crate to slide it into the gap on the top shelf, the front door opened. A gust of wind, violent and sudden, slammed into the room, catching the door and flinging it wide. The pressure change sucked the air out of the shop. Startled, Clara lost her balance. The heavy crate tipped backward. She gasped, her feet slipping on the ladder's rungs. She was falling, and the crate, filled with 20 pounds of tin and syrup, was coming down with her. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. It never came. Instead, a hard wall of force slammed into her side, knocking her clear of the ladder. She hit the floor, the breath driven from her lungs, but she landed on something that was not wood. She landed on a coat. She landed on a man. A split second later, the crate crashed into the floor exactly where she had been standing. Wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. Tins of peaches exploded, sending syrup and jagged metal flying across the floorboards. Clara lay there for a heartbeat, stunned, her face pressed against rough wool that smelled of sage and horse. Heavy arms were wrapped around her, shielding her head. "Are you hurt?" a gravelly voice asked, right against her ear. Clara scrambled back, looking up. Eli Mercer was lying on the floor amidst the wreckage of the crate. He had clearly lunged over the counter to get to her. He was grimacing, his face pale beneath his tan. He sat up slowly, gripping his left shoulder. I am fine," Clara stammered, her hands trembling. "You pushed me. You caught me. Better than letting that box break your neck." Eli grunted. He tried to move his left arm and winced sharply, a hiss of air escaping through his teeth. The door to the office banged open. Milton rushed out, his eyes wide. "What in God's name is happening out here?" he shouted. He stopped, staring at the destruction, the broken crate, the sticky syrup pooling on his floor, the dented tins. And then his eyes landed on his wife sitting on the floor next to a cowboy. "My peaches!" Milton moaned. He looked at Clara, his face twisting into a mask of fury. Look what you have done. I told you to be careful. That is $5 of merchandise ruined. Ruined. He did not ask if she was hurt. He did not look at Eli. Clara felt a cold shock wash over her. I fell. Milton, she said, her voice shaking. The wind. The crate slipped. Mr. Mercer saved me. It would have hit my head. Milton looked at Eli then, but there was no gratitude in his eyes. Only suspicion and annoyance. Mr. Mercer, he said stiffly. I did not hear the bell. Wynne took the door. Eli said. He stood up, favoring his left side. His voice was flat. Dangerous. Your wife nearly got crushed. Crane. That crate is too heavy for her to be lifting alone. Milton bristled, his small chest puffing out. I do not need you to tell me how to run my business or manage my household. Sir, if she was not so clumsy, the crate would be on the shelf and my floor would not be covered in syrup. Eli stared at him. The silence that stretched between them was tight enough to snap. Eli's hands were curled into loose fists at his sides. For a moment, Clara thought he might hit Milton. She almost wanted him to, but Eli just exhaled. A long, controlled breath. I hurt my shoulder, he said quietly. I need a place to look at it. Milton hesitated, then waved a dismissive hand toward the back room. Take her with you. Wrap it up. I have to clean this mess before the ants come. He turned his back on them, grabbing a mop, muttering about the cost of peaches. Clara led Eli into the storeroom. It was a narrow space, piled high with sacks of flour and coils of rope, smelling of dry grain and dust. The light came from a single high window, gray and weak. Sit here, please, Clara whispered, pointing to a stack of feed sacks. Eli sat. He unbuttoned his heavy coat and shrugged it off, wincing as he moved his left arm. Underneath, he wore a gray flannel shirt. He undid the buttons with one hand, his fingers surprisingly dexterous despite the pain. Let me help, Clara said. She stepped closer. Her hands hovered for a moment before she began to undo the buttons of his shirt. It was an intimate act, far too intimate for a married woman and a stranger. But the adrenaline of the accident had stripped away the normal social barriers. She peeled the shirt back. Eli's shoulder was already darkening. A sprawling, ugly bruise was blooming across the deltoid muscle where he had taken the full force of the counter's edge when he lunged for her. The skin was hot to the touch. It is bad, Clara said softly. It will keep, Eli said. Nothing broken, just deep. Clara turned to the shelf where they kept clean rags and a jar of horse liniment. She tore a strip of white cotton cloth. Hold still, she said. She poured a little liniment onto the cloth. It smelled sharp and medicinal, like camphor, and began to dab it onto the bruise. Eli hissed in a breath but did not pull away. Clara worked in silence. She was standing between his knees, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell him, not the stale, sour smell of Milton, but a living, earthy scent, sweat, leather, tobacco, the cold air of the plains, and something else, something masculine and solid. She looked up. Her eyes were level with his. Eli was watching her. His face was just inches away. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the fine lines etched around them by years of squinting into the sun. She saw the scar on his neck vanish into his collar. Her hand lingered on his shoulder. The skin was rough, warm, and alive. For a heartbeat. The world outside the storeroom ceased to exist. There was no Milton, no ruined peaches, no gossiping women. There was just the sound of the wind howling outside and the rapid, thudding rhythm of her own heart. She looked at his mouth. It was a stern mouth, hidden partly by his beard. But she imagined, with a sudden, terrifying vividness, what it would feel like to be kissed by him. Not the dry peck of a contract, but a real kiss. A kiss that meant something. She imagined his arms, heavy and strong, wrapping around her, pulling her against that broad chest, shielding her not just from falling crates, but from the cold, the loneliness, the sheer misery of her existence. Eli's breath hitched. He saw it. He saw the hunger in her eyes, a reflection of the ache in his own chest. His pulse hammered in his throat. He wanted to reach out, He wanted to touch her face, to smooth away the fear that seemed permanently etched there. But he was a man who knew the cost of wanting things he could not have. He gently caught her wrist, stopping her hand. "Clara," he said. His voice was a low rumble. The sound of her name on his lips was like a physical caress. Clara froze. Eli closed his eyes for a second, a look of pain crossing his face that had nothing to do with his shoulder. Then he opened them, and the wall was back up. "Thank you, Mrs. Crane," he said, emphasizing the name. "That will do." He let go of her wrist and stood up, pulling his shirt back over his shoulder with a grimace. He buttoned it quickly, his movements jerky. Clara stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold and exposed. I am sorry," she whispered. "Do not be," Eli said, grabbing his coat. "Just be careful with those crates." He walked out of the storeroom without looking back. Clara heard the front door open and close, the bell jingling cheerfully. A lie in the face of the silence he left behind. That night, the wind died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating stillness over the town. Milton was silent during supper. He ate his stew with precise, mechanical motions, staring at the wall. Clara cleared the table, her nerves stretched taut. She could feel his mood like static electricity in the air. "Why did it take so long?" he asked suddenly. Clara paused, a dish in her hand. "Pardon? In the back room," Milton said, turning his gaze on her. "With the cowboy. It does not take 20 minutes to wrap a bruise. He needed liniment," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "It was a bad injury. Milton, he saved me from being hurt." Milton stood up. He walked over to her. He was a small man, but in that kitchen, he felt enormous. "He saved you," Milton mocked. "Is that what we are calling it? I saw the way he looked at you, and I saw the way you looked at him. Like a sick calf." "That is not true," Clara said, backing up until she hit the wash basin. "Do not lie to me," Milton shouted, his face flushing red. "Do you think I am blind? Do you think I am a fool? I took you out of the gutter. Clara Hayes, I gave you a name. I gave you a home. And the first chance you get, you are making eyes at a saddle tramp in my own storeroom?" "I did nothing," Clara cried. Milton's hand moved faster than she expected. He slapped her. It was a sharp, cracking blow across her cheekbone. Clara gasped, dropping the dish. It shattered on the floor. She raised a hand to her face, staring at him in shock. He had never hit her before. He had been cold, cruel, and demanding, but never violent. Milton looked at his own hand, then at her. He did not look sorry. He looked vindicated. "You are cheap," he spat. "I knew it when I saw you. Just another used woman looking for an easy ride. Clean up this mess, and then get out of my sight." Clara did not speak. She could not. She turned and fled the kitchen, running up the narrow stairs to the storeroom on the landing where they kept the extra blankets. She threw herself inside and locked the door, sliding the bolt home with trembling fingers. She sank to the floor, pressing her cheek against the rough wood. Her face burned where he had struck her. Outside, the coyotes began to yip, a lonely, manic sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Clara pulled her knees to her chest. She realized then, with a clarity that was more painful than the slap, that she had not escaped. She had run from Philadelphia to Wyoming, crossed plains and mountains, only to trade a boarding house prison for a farmhouse prison. She was alone, and she was afraid. Winter clamped its jaws around Red Butte in January. It was a brutal, relentless season. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero and stayed there for weeks. The snow came in horizontal sheets, burying the sagebrush, drifting against the buildings until the town looked like a collection of white mounds. Milton became miserly with the coal. "We are losing money," he declared, "locking the coal bin. We cannot burn profits." Put on another sweater. The upstairs room was an icebox. Frost formed on the inside of the window panes in fern-like patterns. Clara slept in her coat, shivering under thin blankets, seeing her breath puff white in the darkness. She woke up with stiff joints and numb fingers, chipping ice from the wash basin. dreading the moment she had to face Milton. Out on the range, the world was a white hell. Eli and the hands of the double bar spent their days and nights fighting the weather. They wrapped their legs in burlap sacks and wore 2 coats, riding the fence lines, searching for cattle that had huddled into drifts to die. One night, a blizzard struck with 0 visibility. Eli was separated from the group while trying to dig a calf out of a ravine. The wind screamed like a banshee, driving snow into his eyes, blinding him. He found shelter in the shell of an abandoned homestead, a sod house with half a roof. He dragged the calf inside and huddled in the corner, building a small fire with broken fence posts he had scavenged. As the fire flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the dirt walls, Eli stared into the flames. The heat on his face triggered the memory he tried so hard to bury. He was back in Kansas. 5 years ago. The drought had been bad, but the fire had been worse. He remembered the smell of smoke waking him up, the roar of the flames eating the dry timber of his cabin. He remembered screaming for Sarah, for his little girl, Beth. He remembered the heat, the terrible, searing heat, and he remembered the men who had wanted his water rights, the men who had warned him to sell, the men connected to the same syndicate that now backed Asa Briggs in Red Butte. They hadn't meant to kill them, perhaps, just a warning. But fire does not understand intent. Fire only knows how to consume. Eli sat in the freezing dark of the sod house, tears leaking from his eyes to freeze on his cheeks. He had killed one of them. That was why he ran. That was why he was here, a ghost haunting the edges of a town he hated. He thought of Clara. He thought of her terrified eyes in the storeroom, the bruise on her cheek he had seen the last time he was in the store, a mark Milton claimed was from a cupboard door. But Eli knew better. He poked the fire, watching the sparks fly up toward the broken roof. He was a man with nothing to lose, and that made him dangerous. But now, for the first time in years, he felt fear, not for himself, but for the woman trapped in the room above the general store. Sunday morning in Red Butte was a performance of piety. The church was freezing. Despite the wood stove popping in the corner, the congregation sat on hard benches, their breath misting in the air. The preacher, Reverend Thorne, was a man with a face like a hatchet and a voice that boomed with Old Testament fury. Clara sat beside Milton, her hands folded in her lap. She wore her best dress, which was frayed at the cuffs, and kept her head bowed. The sermon that day was on the virtue of the Proverbs 31 woman. She is like the merchant ships, Reverend Thorne thundered, glaring at the congregation. She bringeth her food from afar. She worketh willingly with her hands. She is not idle. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, lingering for a beat too long on Clara. And she is not a woman of loose morals, he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She is not a woman who invites scandal. She is a crown to her husband, not rottenness in his bones. Clara felt the eyes of the town boring into her back. The women shifted in their seats, rustling their skirts. The message was clear. Everyone knew about the incident in the store. The story had mutated, as stories do in small towns. Now, it was said that Clara had lured the cowboy into the back room, that she was ungrateful, that poor Milton was a saint for putting up with her. After the sermon, Milton stood up. Reverend, he announced, his voice loud in the quiet church. My wife has a fine voice. She would like to lead us in the closing hymn. Clara's head snapped up. She stared at Milton in horror. He knew she hated singing in public. He knew her voice was thin and uncertain. This was a test, a public shaming disguised as piety. Stand up, Clara, Milton hissed, gripping her elbow with bruising force. Do not embarrass me. Clara stood. Her legs felt like water. She walked to the front of the church, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She faced the congregation. Rows of faces looked back, judgmental, amused, cruel. She opened her mouth to sing Rock of Ages, cleft for me. She sang. Her voice wavered. It cracked on the high note. Someone in the back row snickered. A woman whispered something to her neighbor. Clara's throat closed up. She forced the words out, tears stinging her eyes. She was stripping herself bare in front of them, offering up her humiliation as penance for a sin she hadn't committed. Milton sat in the front pew, watching her with a satisfied smirk. He was breaking her, piece by piece, showing the town that he had his purchase under control. When the hymn ended, Clara fled. She did not wait for the benediction. She turned and ran down the aisle, bursting out of the church doors into the blinding white of the winter day. The wooden steps of the church were coated in a sheet of clear ice. Clara, blinded by tears, missed her footing. Her boots skid on the slick wood. She flailed, crying out as her feet went out from under her. She braced herself for the hard impact of the frozen ground, but for the second time, the ground did not come. Strong hands caught her by the waist. A solid chest absorbed her momentum. She was held firm, suspended for a moment between falling and flying. She gasped. Looking up, Eli Mercer was standing at the bottom of the steps. He had been waiting outside, not welcome in the church but unable to stay away. He held her steady, his gloved hands large and warm even through the wool of her coat. His face was inches from hers, the dark beard dusted with snow, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. "Got you," he murmured. The world stopped. The cold, the church, the husband inside, it all vanished. There was only the heat of his hands on her waist and the sound of his voice, low and steady, an anchor in the storm. Clara looked at him, her breath hitching in a sob, and in that look, something terrifying happened. The hope she thought was dead, the hope she had buried under layers of shame and duty, flared back to life. It was a dangerous, reckless hope. She realized, with a jolt that went straight to her soul, that she did not want him to let go. Eli looked down at her, and he knew it too. He tightened his grip for just a fraction of a second, a silent promise, before the church doors banged open behind them and the sound of Milton's angry voice spilled out into the snow. The spring in Wyoming was not a gentle awakening. It was a violent upheaval. The snow that had buried Red Butte for months did not melt so much as it collapsed, turning the hard-packed drifts into a slurry of thick, sucking mud that coated everything it touched. The road into town became a brown river, and with the thaw came the drifters, a caravan of peddlers, tin pan menders, and gamblers arrived with the warmer winds, setting up their tents on the edge of town like vultures waiting for a carcass to ripen. The air in Red Butte changed. It smelled of wet earth, horse manure, and cheap whiskey. The saloon, Asa Briggs's domain, roared with life until the early hours of the morning, the piano clanking out discordant tunes that drifted across the street to the darkened room where Clara lay awake. Milton Crane had changed with the season. The pinch-faced frugality of the winter had given way to a frantic, sweating desperation. He began leaving the store in the middle of the afternoon, his hands shaking as he tied his cravat, muttering about business meetings that everyone knew were nothing more than card games at the saloon. Clara was left to manage the mercantile alone. She hauled the heavy shutters closed at dusk, her boots caked with the ubiquitous mud, and locked the till, which grew lighter with every passing day. She saw the way the town looked at the store now, not with respect, but with the pity one reserves for a dying animal. One Tuesday evening, while sweeping the boardwalk, Clara overheard two cattlemen leaning against the hitching post. "Crane is in deep," one said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. "I heard he put the deed to the store on the table last night. He is a fool," the other replied, laughing. "Spent all that money paying for a wife from back east and is losing his shirt anyway. Seems he cannot keep a grip on anything." Clara froze, her grip tightening on the broom handle until her knuckles turned white. She backed into the store, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The rumors were true, the silence in the house, the missing inventory, Milton's erratic moods. It all pointed to a precipice they were hurtling toward. That night, Milton stumbled home long after midnight. Clara was sitting in the kitchen, mending a tear in his coat by the light of a single tallow candle. When the door crashed open, she jumped, pricking her finger. Milton stood in the doorway, swaying, His eyes were red-rimmed and glassy, his suit stained with spilled liquor. He looked at her, but he did not see her. He saw a ledger sheet. "You are still up," he slurred, bracing himself against the doorframe. "I was waiting," Clara said quietly. "Waiting," Milton sneered. He lurched into the room, knocking a chair over. He did not pick it up. He slumped onto the bench, burying his face in his hands. I lost it all. Clara, the cash, the shipment of flour." Clara felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. "How much?" "Milton, everything," he shouted, then lowered his voice to a terrified whisper. "I owe Briggs. I owe him more than the store is worth. He gave me a week to find $500. Clara stared at him. $500 was a fortune. It was an impossible sum. "What will we do?" she whispered. Milton raised his head. He looked at her then, really looked at her, his gaze traveling over her face, her neck, the curve of her bodice. It was a look devoid of affection, stripping her down to her value as a commodity. It made her stomach twist violently. "Briggs is a reasonable man," Milton muttered, a strange, wet shine in his eyes. "He likes nice things. He noticed you. Clara. He said a man might work off a debt in other ways if he has the right collateral." Clara stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What are you saying?" "Nothing," Milton said quickly, looking away. "Just talk. Men's talk. Go to bed. Woman." Clara fled the room, but she could feel his gaze on her back, heavy and calculating, like a butcher eyeing a lamb. 2 days later, the bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer. Clara was in the back room, counting sacks of beans, when a shadow fell across the doorway. She turned and found Asa Briggs standing there. He was a handsome man in a serpentine way, with slicked-back dark hair and a suit that cost more than everything in the store combined. He wore a diamond ring on his pinky finger that caught the dim light. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes, which were flat and dark as polished coal. "Mrs. Crane," he said, his voice smooth like oil. "A pleasure to see you, Mr. Briggs," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "My husband is at the bank. I know where Milton is," Asa said, stepping into the small room. He filled the space, making the air feel thin. "I did not come to see him. I came to see if you were settling in. It must be lonely for a city girl out here in the dust." "I am fine. Thank you," Clara said, backing up until her waist hit the edge of a shelf. Asa took another step. He reached out and picked up a spool of ribbon from the work table, idly unrolling a strip of blue silk. "You are a very pretty woman." "Clara," he said softly, "much too pretty to be hauling sacks and scrubbing floors. Milton does not appreciate quality. He buys things he cannot afford and then lets them go to ruin." "Please leave," Clara said, her heart pounding in her throat. Asa dropped the ribbon. He moved closer, invading her personal space. He reached out, his hand trailing near her waist, his fingers brushing the fabric of her apron. Clara flinched, but she was trapped against the shelves. A woman as pretty as a catalog picture could be worth plenty in this town, Asa murmured. If she were friendly, if she knew how to be grateful to the men who run things. Clara shoved his hand away. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "I belong to my husband." Asa laughed. It was a low, dry sound. "Your husband belongs to me, my dear, and by extension, everything he has is mine, even his debts." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive cigars. "Debts do not vanish, Clara, and some women do not get to choose their price. Think on that." He turned and walked out, pausing at the door to adjust his cuffs. The bell chimed cheerfully as he left, leaving Clara shaking in the gloom, the scent of his cigar smoke hanging in the air like a poison. Eli Mercer had been crossing the street from the livery when he saw Asa Briggs exit the mercantile. He saw the satisfied smirk on the saloon owner's face, the way he adjusted his coat like a man who had just finished a good meal. Eli stopped. A cold prickle of warning ran down his spine. He knew Asa. He knew that look. He waited until Asa had disappeared into the saloon. Then he crossed the street and entered the store. The front room was empty. "Mrs. Crane," he called out. His voice was low, cautious. There was no answer. Eli walked to the back room. He found Clara standing by the grain sacks, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale as milk. She was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering. "Clara," Eli said, stepping forward. She jumped, a small cry escaping her lips. When she saw it was him, her shoulders sagged, but the terror did not leave her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, the lie brittle and transparent. I felt a chill." Eli did not buy it. He walked over to her, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He stopped a few feet away, respecting the distance she usually kept. But his eyes were sharp. "I saw Briggs leave," Eli said. "What did he want?" "Nothing," Clara said, looking at the floor. "He was looking for Milton." Eli took a step closer. "Clara, look at me." She looked up. Her eyes were swimming with unshed tears, wide with a fear that tore at his gut. "Did he touch you?" Eli asked. His voice was quiet, but there was a tremor of violence underneath it. Clara shook her head, then nodded. A single, jerky motion. He said things. He said Milton owes him. He said she could not finish." She covered her mouth with her hand, a sob breaking through. Eli's jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. He knew exactly what Asa had said. He knew the game. It was the same game Asa had played with the ranchers in the valley, the same game that ended in smoke and ash. But this was worse. This was not land. This was a soul. He moved then, closing the distance between them. He did not grab her. He simply stood close enough to be a wall between her and the door. "Tell me," he commanded gently. Clara's voice cracked. "He said I could pay the debt. He said some women do not get to choose." She looked at Eli, her expression crumbling. "I am tired." "Eli." "I am tired of being something people buy. I was bought to come here, and now I am being sold to pay for a mistake I did not make. I am not a person to them. I am just currency." The pain in her voice severed the last of Eli's restraint. The old rage, the black fire he had kept banked for years, roared to life. But he did not let it consume him. He channeled it into a promise. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He waited until she did not pull away. Then he gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His skin was rough, calloused from rope and rain, but his touch was agonizingly tender. "No one is going to sell you," he said. His voice was a low growl, vibrating in the small room. "Not Asa, not Milton." Clara leaned into his hand, just for a second, closing her eyes. "How can you stop them?" she whispered. "They own everything. They do not own you," Eli said fiercely. "And as long as I am breathing, no one takes you. Do you hear me? No one." Clara opened her eyes. She saw the truth in his face, a dark, dangerous determination. For the first time in months, she did not feel alone. She felt the forbidden warmth of his hand on her cheek, a connection that went deeper than skin. It terrified her, and it saved her. She nodded. Eli dropped his hand slowly, as if it pained him to let go. He stepped back, the air between them charged with the electricity of things unspoken. "Lock the door," he said hoarsely. "I will watch the street tonight." He turned and left, but the ghost of his touch burned on her skin for hours. The week that followed was a slow march toward disaster. The town was preparing for the celebration of the new telegraph line, a wire that would finally connect Red Butte to the civilized world. A platform had been built in the town square, draped in bunting. On Saturday, the entire town gathered. The wind was blowing hard, whipping the flags and ladies' skirts, but the mood was festive. There was a brass band, a barrel of whiskey, and a speech by the mayor. Milton insisted Clara attend. "You will wear your blue dress," he ordered, "and you will smile. I need the town to see we are prosperous." They stood near the front of the crowd. Milton was already drunk, swaying slightly, his face flushed. Clara stood stiffly beside him, her hands clasped so tightly her fingers were numb. The mayor finished his speech about progress and the future. Then, He called on the prominent businessmen of the town to say a few words. Milton stumbled up the steps to the platform. He grabbed the railing to steady himself. The crowd quieted, sensing a spectacle. "Friends," Milton bellowed, his speech slurring, "we are connected. The world is coming to Red Butte, just like my wife came to Red Butte." He pointed a shaking finger at Clara. The crowd turned to look at her. She felt the blood drain from her face. "Some of you laughed when I sent for her," Milton shouted, grinning crookedly. "But look at her, a bit skinny, maybe, but that is the beauty of the catalog. Gentlemen, pre-wrapped from back east, you pay your money and you take your chances." The crowd erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, raucous sound. Men slapped their knees. Women tittered behind their hands. Clara stood frozen. The laughter felt like stones pelting her skin. She was naked before them, stripped of her dignity, reduced to a punchline in a drunkard's joke. She stared straight ahead, her eyes burning, refusing to let them see her cry. On the edge of the crowd, leaning against the corner of the livery stable, Eli Mercer watched. He felt a cold, white ringing in his ears. His hand dropped to the Colt on his hip. He wanted to walk up those steps and beat Milton Crane until he could not stand. He wanted to silence that laughter with lead. He took one step forward, his boot grinding into the dirt. Then he stopped. If he moved now, if he defended her publicly, he would only confirm the rumors. He would mark her as his, and in the eyes of this town, that would make her a whore. He could not save her by destroying her reputation further. Eli turned away. He walked fast, heading away from the square, away from the laughter, away from the woman he could not protect. He walked until the buildings gave way to sagebrush and the ground rose toward the foothills. He stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley. The sky was vast and indifferent, a hard blue dome. The wind tore at his coat. Eli took his hat off and ran a hand through his hair. He looked back at the town, a smudge of wood and smoke in the distance. "I love her," he said to the empty air. The words tasted like ash. He was in love with another man's wife. He was in love with a woman he could not have, a woman whose life was being dismantled while he stood by and watched. It was a sin. It was a tragedy. And it was the truest thing he had ever felt. The celebration ended at dusk. Milton grabbed Clara's arm and dragged her away from the dwindling crowd. He did not take her to the front door of the store. He pulled her into the narrow, trash-strewn alley between the mercantile and the barber shop. "You embarrassed me," he hissed, shoving her against the rough wood of the wall. "I did nothing," Clara cried, pulling her arm free. "You mocked me, Milton. You humiliated me in front of the whole town. I was making a joke," Milton shouted. "You stood there like a statue, like a stone-faced ghost. You make me look weak. Clara, everyone laughs at me because of you. They laugh at you because you are a drunk and a gambler," Clara screamed, the months of silence finally shattering. The slap came so fast she did not see it. It was a backhand, heavy and hard. His ring caught her lip. Clara's head snapped back. She tasted blood, hot and metallic. She slid down the wall, stunning pain radiating through her jaw. Milton stood over her, breathing hard. His face was a mask of ugly, pathetic rage. "You will learn your place," he spat, "and you will be useful." Briggs called in the note. "He wants payment tomorrow." He leaned down, grabbing a handful of her hair to pull her face up. "If you will not help me settle my debts one way, you will do it another." I told him he could have you. 1 night, 2 nights, however long it takes to clear the ledger. You are going to the saloon tomorrow night, Clara, and you will do whatever he says. He shoved her head back against the wall and straightened up. "Don't bother coming inside tonight. You can sleep in the shed. Maybe the cold will teach you some gratitude." He walked away, leaving her sitting in the mud of the alley, blood dripping from her split lip onto her blue dress. The moon was a sliver of ice in the sky when Clara moved. She did not go to the shed. She did not go to the store. She ran. She kept to the shadows, moving behind the buildings, flitting like a ghost through the darkness. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her face throbbed with a dull, heavy pulse. She reached the livery stable. The big double doors were closed, but the small side door was unlatched. She slipped inside. The air was warm and smelled of sweet hay and horses. It was quiet, save for the soft chewing of animals and the scuff of a boot on straw. "Eli?" she whispered. A lantern flared to life in one of the stalls. Eli stepped out, his gun already half drawn before he saw who it was. He lowered the weapon instantly. "Clara?" He saw her face in the lantern light. He saw the swelling on her cheek, the cut on her lip, the blood on her chin. The lantern hit the ground. It didn't break, but it tilted, casting wild, swinging shadows. Eli was across the space in 2 strides. He did this. Eli said it wasn't a question. His voice was terrifying, empty of all emotion, cold as the grave. Clara nodded, tears spilling over. She reached out and grabbed the lapels of his coat, her fingers digging into the wool. "Eli, you have to leave," she sobbed. "You have to go tonight." "What?" Eli grabbed her shoulders to steady her. "I am not going anywhere. I am going to kill him." "No!" Clara cried. She shook him. "Desperate. If you hurt him, the sheriff will hang you. Asa owns the law. Eli, you know that. He sold me. Eli—" She choked on the words. "Milton sold me. He told Asa he could have me tomorrow night to pay the debt. He is going to force me." Eli went still. The rage that had been a fire became a block of ice. It was a cold so deep it burned. "I will kill them both," he said flatly. "No, Eli, please," Clara begged. "If you fight them, you die. They have 10 men. You are alone. Please, just go. I came to tell you to run so you don't get dragged into this. I can't have your blood on my hands too. I am not leaving you." Eli roared. The shout echoed in the rafters. The horses stamped in their stalls. They stood chest to chest in the dim light, breathing hard. The air between them was thick with terror and adrenaline. "Why?" Clara screamed back. "Why would you stay for me? I am nothing. I am just a mail-order bride who, because I love you." The words hung in the air, suspending time. Clara stared at him, her mouth open, the blood drying on her lip. Eli looked shocked by his own admission, his chest heaving. He looked at her bruised face, her terrified eyes, and he broke. He reached out and pulled her to him. It was not gentle this time. It was an act of desperation. His hands tangled in her hair, and he crashed his mouth down onto hers. Clara gasped, but she did not pull away. She melted into him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, needing him to be the barrier between her and the world. They kissed with all the hunger of 2 starving people finding bread. It was a kiss of salt and blood and tears. It was rough and clumsy and frantic. Eli's hands gripped her waist, her back, trying to memorize the feel of her. Clara pressed herself against him, seeking his heat, seeking to be consumed by something other than fear. For a moment, in the hay-scented dark, they were not a scarred cowboy and a battered wife. They were just a man and a woman who had found the only thing worth living for in a world that wanted them dead. They broke apart, gasping for air, foreheads resting against each other. Eli's hands were shaking as they framed her face. Clara looked into his eyes and saw the reflection of her own soul, broken, terrified, but fiercely alive. "God help us," Eli whispered, his thumb tracing the cut on her lip. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the universe settling back onto their shoulders. She knew then that there was no running away from this. There was no leaving. "We are in trouble," she whispered. Eli pulled her head down to his shoulder, holding her tight against the coming storm. "Yes," he said into her hair, "but we are in it together, and if I burn for this, Clara, I will make sure I take this whole damn town with me." The morning light that filtered into the Crane kitchen was gray and unforgiving, exposing the grime in the corners of the room and the hollow exhaustion on Milton's face. He sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, staring at the floor. Clara moved silently around him, placing a plate of biscuits on the table. She flinched when her skirt brushed against his chair. Milton's eyes snapped to her hem. It was stained with mud, fresh, red mud that had not yet dried completely. He looked up at her face, seeing the swelling on her lip where he had struck her the night before. But it was not the injury that held his attention. It was the look in her eyes. It was a look of defiance he had never seen before, a look that told him she had gone somewhere, seen someone, and found a strength he had tried to beat out of her. "You went out," Milton said. His voice was a dry rasp. Clara did not answer. She turned back to the stove. "You went to him, didn't you?" Milton whispered. "The cowboy. Mercer." He stood up, the chair scraping violently against the floorboards. Panic and jealousy warred in his chest. He was a drowning man, and the water was rising fast. If Clara was ruined, if she was soiling herself with a drifter, then she was losing value. And value was the only thing Milton had left to trade. He grabbed his coat and hat, stumbling out the door without another word. He did not go to the bank. He went straight to the saloon, where Asa Briggs was eating a breakfast of steak and eggs in his private office. An hour later, a deal was struck in a haze of cigar smoke and desperation. Milton Crane walked out of the saloon wiping sweat from his upper lip, having signed a piece of paper that made his stomach turn, but kept his store open for another month. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself Clara owed him. He told himself she was already damaged goods anyway. The sun was setting behind the western ridges, casting long, bruised shadows across the town of Red Butte. When the bell above the mercantile door jingled, Clara was alone in the store. She had spent the day in a fugue state, moving like a sleepwalker, her mind replaying the kiss in the livery stable over and over. It was the only thing keeping her upright. She looked up as the door opened. Asa Briggs walked in. Behind him were two men Clara had seen loitering near the stockyards, thick-necked, rough men with knuckles scarred from fighting. One was called Silas, a giant with a wandering eye. The other was a wiry man named Pike. "Mr. Crane is not here," Clara said, her voice tight. "We are closing, Mr. Briggs." "I know," Asa said, smiling that oily, terrifying smile. "Milton is at the saloon. He prefers not to be present for the transaction." "Transaction," Clara repeated, stepping back behind the counter. Asa reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He smoothed it out on the counter. It was a promissory note, signed in Milton's shaky hand. "Your husband and I came to an arrangement," Asa said. "He cannot pay his debt in cash, so he has agreed to lease out his assets. You are going to come with us." "Clara, I have rooms upstairs at the Silver Dollar. You will work there until the debt is cleared." Clara stared at him, the blood draining from her face until she was white as a sheet. She knew what those rooms were. She knew what working there meant. "No," she whispered. "It is not a request," Asa said. He gestured to the two men. "Silas, Pike, escort Mrs. Crane to her new quarters." The two men moved around the counter. Clara screamed. She grabbed a heavy glass jar of peppermint sticks and hurled it at Silas. It shattered against his shoulder, sending candy and glass flying. Silas grunted, more surprised than hurt, and lunged for her. Clara scrambled back, knocking over a display of thread. She grabbed a pair of fabric shears from the counter, holding them out like a knife. "Stay back!" she shrieked. Milton appeared in the doorway of the back office. He had been there the whole time, hiding. He looked pale and sick, refusing to meet her eyes. "Just go with them." "Clara," he mumbled, looking at his shoes. "It is only for a while. You owe me this. You never loved me anyway." "You coward!" Clara screamed at him. "You soulless coward!" Pike grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she dropped the shears. She clawed at his face with her free hand, her nails raking down his cheek. He cursed and backhanded her, sending her crashing into the shelves. Tins of baking powder rained down, exploding in white clouds. "Get her legs," Asa commanded, watching calmly from the center of the room. Clara kicked wildly, her boot connecting with Pike's shin. She fought with the ferocity of a trapped animal, screaming for help, though she knew the town would only turn up the music to drown her out. But someone was listening. A young stable boy named Timmy, who had been sweeping the boardwalk outside, had seen the men enter and heard the scream. He dropped his broom and ran, not to the sheriff, but to the bunkhouse behind the livery where he knew the only man in town who looked at Mrs. Crane with kindness was packing his saddlebags. Inside the store, Silas had managed to pin Clara's arms. Asa stepped forward, reaching out to touch her face. Now, he purred. No need to fight. You might even enjoy. The back door of the store exploded inward. It did not open. It was kicked off its hinges with a force that shook the walls. Splintered wood flew across the room. Eli Mercer stood in the jagged opening. He held a Colt Peacemaker in his right hand, the hammer already cocked. His eyes were black holes of fury. "Let her go," he roared. The sound was so primal, so filled with violence, that Silas froze. Asa spun around, his hand diving inside his coat for his hideout gun. Eli didn't wait. He didn't shoot Asa. He needed the man alive to confess. Or perhaps he just wanted to hurt him with his hands, but he pistol-whipped Silas across the temple. The big man crumpled like a sack of wet grain. Pike drew a knife. Eli holstered his gun in a blur of motion and met the charge. He caught Pike's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crack, and drove his fist into the man's jaw. Pike went flying backward, crashing into a display of lanterns. Asa had his gun out now. He leveled it at Eli. Eli ducked as the shot went wild, shattering a jar of pickles on the shelf behind him. He lunged through the cloud of white baking powder and baking soda, tackling Asa to the floor. They rolled, crashing into crates and barrels. Asa was strong, but Eli was fighting with the rage of a man who had lost everything once and refused to lose it again. He pinned Asa down and rained blows onto his face. 1, 2, 3, until Asa's nose shattered and blood sprayed across the sawdust floor. Eli stood up, chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding. He turned to Clara. She was huddled against the counter, covered in white powder and glass, shaking violently. "Are you hurt?" Eli asked, his voice breaking. Clara shook her head, sobbing. She reached out for him. Eli took a step toward her, but the front door swung open. Sheriff Brady stood there, a double-barreled shotgun leveled at Eli's chest. Behind him stood Milton Crane, pointing a trembling finger. "That is him!" Milton shouted. "He broke in. He attacked Mr. Briggs. He tried to kill us. Drop the gun." "Mercer," the sheriff barked, "or I will cut you in half." Eli froze. He looked at the shotgun, then at Clara. If he drew, he died. And if he died, there was no one left to stand between her and the room at the Silver Dollar. Slowly, carefully, he unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop to the floor. Asa Briggs groaned, sitting up. He held a handkerchief to his ruined nose. Arrest him? Brady. He gurgled through the blood. Attempted murder and kidnapping. He was trying to take the girl. "That is a lie," Clara screamed. Standing up, "Asa was taking me. Milton sold me to him." The sheriff looked at her with cold, dismissive eyes. "You are hysterical. Mrs. Crane, you do not know what you are saying. It is clear this man broke in. Look at the door. He tried to save me," Clara cried, looking frantically from Milton to the sheriff. "Tell them, Milton, tell the truth." Milton looked at Eli, hate burning in his eyes. "He broke in," he said flatly. "He is a madman. Take him." The sheriff ordered his deputy, who had appeared behind him. They grabbed Eli, forcing his arms behind his back and clamping iron cuffs onto his wrists. Eli did not fight them. He kept his eyes locked on Clara. "Do not touch her," Eli said, his voice low and deadly. "If any of you touch her again, walls will not hold me. Get him out of here," Asa spat. They dragged Eli out into the gathering dark. Clara tried to run after him, but Milton grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. "You are staying right here," he hissed. "You have caused enough trouble." Clara watched through the broken window as they shoved Eli toward the jailhouse, her heart tearing in two. The Red Butte jail was a stone box with a single iron-barred window that faced the alley. It smelled of urine, rust, and despair. Eli sat on the narrow cot, his head in his hands. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a dull, throbbing ache in his hands and a cold pit of fear in his stomach. He had failed. He was in a cage, and Clara was with the wolves. A shadow fell across the moonlight on the floor. "Eli," a voice whispered. He was at the window in a heartbeat. Clara stood in the alley, wrapped in a dark shawl. Her face was pale in the moonlight, her eyes huge and dark. "Clara," Eli breathed. He reached his hands through the bars. "You shouldn't be here. If Milton sees you—" "I don't care," she said. She reached up and grasped his hands. Her fingers were ice cold, but her grip was desperate. They pressed their foreheads against the cold iron bars, breathing in each other's scent. For a moment, they just existed in the contact, two shipwrecked souls clinging to driftwood. "I'm going to get you out," Clara whispered. "No," Eli said. "You cannot. Brady has the keys on his belt. Listen to me, Clara. You have to leave. Tonight. Take the stagecoach if it comes. Run! I am not leaving you," she said fiercely. "You do not know who I am," Eli said. He pulled back slightly, needing to see her face, needing her to know the truth before it was too late. "I know you," Clara said. "No, you know the man I am trying to be." "You do not know the man I was." He took a breath, the air rattling in his chest. 10 years ago, he said, his voice rough. "I lived in Kansas. I had a farm. I had a wife named Sarah, and a little girl, Beth. She was 3. Clara went still, her thumbs stroking the backs of his scarred hands. "There was a land syndicate moving through," Eli continued. "They wanted the water rights to the creek on my land. Asa Briggs was one of their enforcers then. He wasn't the boss, just a man who did the dirty work. I refused to sell." He closed his eyes, the memory playing out against his eyelids like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. "One night, they set a fire. Just a warning, they said later, to scare us out, but the wind picked up. It moved too fast. The roof collapsed before I could get to the bedroom." He swallowed hard, his throat clicking. "I heard them screaming, 'Clara,' and I couldn't get to them. I burned my hands trying to lift the beam, but I couldn't move it. I watched them die." Tears slipped from his eyes, tracking through the dust on his face. "I went mad. I hunted the men who said it. I found one of them in a saloon 3 towns over. I didn't turn him in. I beat him until he stopped breathing." He looked at her, waiting for the revulsion, waiting for her to pull her hands away. "I am a killer. Clara. That is why I drift. That is why I have nothing. I have been running from that fire for 10 years. Clara did not pull away. She reached through the bars and cupped his face, her palms cool against his fevered skin. "I do not care," she said softly. Her voice was steady, clearer than he had ever heard it. "But—" "Hush," she said. "I do not care what you did in the dark. Eli, I care about who you are in the light. You are the man who stopped in the rain to help a stranger. You are the man who caught me when I fell. You are the only person in this entire cursed world who has ever looked at me and seen a human being." She leaned closer, pressing her forehead to the bars again. "The only time I feel alive is when you look at me," she confessed. "Before you, I was just waiting to die. I would rather be a killer's woman than a coward's wife." Eli let out a shuddering breath, turning his face to kiss her palm. "I swear to you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I will get out of here, and I will take you somewhere where the wind doesn't carry their voices. We will go to Oregon or California, somewhere green, somewhere safe. I will go anywhere," Clara said. "I would die running beside you rather than live one more day in that house." Footsteps echoed at the end of the alley. "Go," Eli urged, pushing her gently away. "Before they find you, I will be ready," Clara promised. She vanished into the shadows, leaving Eli alone in the cell. But the cell didn't feel like a coffin anymore. It felt like a waiting room. Morning brought a heavy, sulphurous sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and menacing. Milton Crane walked into the sheriff's office at 8 o'clock. He looked haggard, his eyes darting around the room. Sheriff Brady sat at his desk, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. "Is the paperwork ready?" Milton asked nervously. Brady nodded toward a document on the desk. Asa dropped the assault charges. "In exchange for the restitution. You sign this, acknowledging the transfer of labor. and the cowboy goes free. Eventually, Milton picked up the pen. His hand shook. He knew what he was signing. He was signing away his wife's body to settle a gambling debt. He told himself he had no choice. He told himself Eli Mercer was a dangerous criminal who deserved to be locked up. He scratched his signature on the line. "When can he go?" Milton asked. Brady laughed. "Asa wants to make sure the merchandise is delivered first. We will hold Mercer until tonight. Once your wife is settled in her room at the Silver Dollar, I will cut him loose and tell him to ride. If he comes back, we shoot him." Milton nodded, sick relief washing over him. He turned to leave. Outside the office, crouched beneath the open window, Clara lowered her head. She had heard every word. She did not go back to the store. She went to the back of the building, where Milton kept his saddle horse, a sturdy roan gelding, tied to the rail. She moved with a cold, terrifying calm. She slipped into the back door of the store. Milton was still at the sheriff's. She went to the safe. He had left it unlocked in his haste yesterday. She grabbed the canvas bag of emergency cash, $60 in silver and notes. She grabbed a box of cartridges from the shelf. She grabbed a heavy wool coat from the rack. She went back out to the horse. She struggled to heave the heavy western saddle onto the roan's back, her breath coming in short gasps. She tightened the cinch, the horse grunting in protest. She tied the coat and the bag to the saddle horn. She climbed up, her skirts tangling around her legs. She wasn't a rider, but fear was a potent teacher. She kicked the horse hard. The roan leaped forward. Clara clung to the horn, gritting her teeth. She did not look back at the store. She rode down the alley, cutting behind the saloon, and kicked the horse into a gallop as they hit the edge of town. She was running. For the first time in her life, she was not walking toward a prison. She was running toward the horizon. The alarm was raised 20 minutes later. Milton found the empty safe. Then he found the missing horse. He ran into the street, screaming that he had been robbed. Asa Briggs stood on the porch of the saloon, watching the dust clouds settling in the west. His face, bandaged and purple, twisted into a snarl. "She has the money," Milton wailed. "And the horse. She is running to meet him," Asa said. He looked at the sheriff. "That cowboy has a plan. He's going to break out." Brady cursed. "I have the keys. He isn't going anywhere. But inside the jail cell..." Eli was already working. He had not slept. He had spent the night watching the lock mechanism. He knew these old iron locks. They were simple things, built for honest men. He had found a loose nail in the frame of the cot. He had spent hours working it back and forth until the metal fatigued and snapped. It was a crude pick, but his hands that could mend a fence or gentle a horse, were steady. He heard the commotion outside. He heard Milton shouting about the horse. "Now," Eli whispered. He jammed the nail into the keyhole. He felt for the tumbler. He twisted. Click. The door swung open with a groan of rust. Eli stepped out into the office. It was empty. Brady was outside with the posse. Eli grabbed his gun belt from the desk where they had tossed it. He buckled it on, the weight of the Colt familiar and reassuring against his hip. He saw a Winchester rifle in the rack. He took that too. He ran out the back door, scanning the alley. There was a horse tied at the hitching post, the deputy's bay. Eli vaulted into the saddle. He didn't care about stealth. He kicked the horse into a run, tearing out of the alley and onto the main street just as the sheriff and Asa were mounting up with 5 other men. "There he is," Brady shouted. Eli didn't look back. He leaned over the horse's neck, urging the animal on. He saw the tracks of the roan heading west, toward the open plain. "Hold on, Clara," he gritted out. The storm that had been threatening all morning finally broke. It was a hammer blow from the heavens. The sky turned a bruised purple-black, and lightning forked down, striking the ground with deafening cracks. The wind roared, tearing up sagebrush and throwing walls of dust that turned instantly to mud as the rain began to fall. Huge, cold drops that stung like hail. Clara was terrified. The roan was spooked by the thunder. It fought the bit, tossing its head. Clara lost her stirrup. A bolt of lightning struck a juniper tree 50 yards to her left. The tree exploded in a shower of sparks. The roan reared, terrified. Clara screamed as she lost her grip. She was thrown backward, landing hard in the mud. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She rolled, gasping, her vision swimming. The horse bolted, vanishing into the curtain of rain. Clara lay in the mud, the rain soaking her dress in seconds. She tried to stand, but her ankle gave way with a sharp spike of pain. She crawled toward a cluster of rocks, huddled against the wind. She heard hoofbeats. She looked back toward the town. Through the gray sheets of rain, she saw shapes, riders, a lot of them. They were coming. Asa, Milton, the men who owned her. She fumbled in her pocket for the small knife she had taken from the kitchen. She would not go back. She would not. Then, a single rider burst through the gloom, ahead of the pack. He was riding low, his duster flapping like black wings behind him. He saw the riderless roan. Then he saw her huddled by the rocks. "Eli!" she screamed, the sound torn away by the wind. He heard her. He pulled the bay up in a spray of mud, sliding to a halt beside her. He reached down, his arm extended. "Take my hand!" he roared over the thunder. Clara reached up. He grabbed her forearm, his grip iron-strong. With a heave that strained his back, he swung her up behind him. "Hold on!" Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his wet coat. A crack sounded, not thunder. A bullet whizzed past Eli's ear. The posse was closing in. They were firing. Eli kicked the bay. The horse lunged forward. Another shot. Eli jerked, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. A bullet had grazed his side, tearing through the duster and biting into flesh. "You're hit!" Clara cried. "It's nothing!" Eli shouted. He steered the horse away from the flat ground, aiming for the jagged, pine-covered slopes of the foothills. The mud was slippery, treacherous, but the bay was sure-footed. They scrabbled up a steep game trail, dodging low-hanging branches. Behind them, the sheriff's men pulled up at the base of the slope, their heavy horses balking at the incline and the slick rocks. Eli didn't stop. He pushed the horse higher, deeper into the canyons, into the teeth of the storm where the rain would wash away their tracks. As they crested the ridge, lightning illuminated the valley below. Red Butte was just a smear of yellow lights in the darkness, a small, hateful place that was shrinking with every stride. They were wet, they were bleeding, and they were hunted, but as they vanished into the timber, swallowed by the wild, indifferent west, they were free. The cabin was little more than a whisper of human presence in a wilderness that did not care if they lived or died. It sat high in the timberline, where the air was thin and smelled of pine resin and coming snow. The logs were silver with age, chinked with moss that had dried to a brittle gray. The roof, patched with bark and tin, leaked in 3 places when the rain came down hard. But the walls were solid. For Clara and Eli, it was a palace. They had stumbled upon it in the blue-black hour before dawn, the bay horse trembling with exhaustion, its coat matted with mud. Eli had slid from the saddle first, his legs buckling, before reaching up to help Clara down. They had collapsed inside, huddled together on the dirt floor, too tired to build a fire, shivering as the storm raged itself out against the mountains. When Clara woke, the sun was slicing through the gaps in the shutters, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cold air. She sat up. Every inch of her body ached. Her ankle throbbed where she had twisted it, and her lip was swollen and tender. But she was alive. She looked around. The cabin was sparse, a stone hearth, a broken table, a bunk bed with a rotting mattress frame. Eli was not there. Panic, sharp and sudden, seized her. "Eli," she called out, her voice raspy. The door creaked open. Eli stepped inside, carrying an armful of deadfall wood. He looked terrible. His face was gray beneath the beard, his eyes sunken and rimmed with red. His coat was stained with dried blood on the left side. "I am here," he said softly, dropping the wood by the hearth. "I was just checking the horse. He is lame. Clara, he needs rest." He walked over to her, moving with a stiffness that made her heart ache. He knelt beside her, his eyes searching her face. "How is the ankle?" he asked. "It is fine." Clara lied. "How is your side?" Eli grimaced. It stopped bleeding, but it needs cleaning. He reached into his saddlebag, which lay in the corner, and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and a clean rag. He sat on the floor, leaning back against the wall, and began to unbutton his shirt. Clara moved before she thought, "Let me." She knelt between his spread legs. Her hands shook slightly as she pushed the heavy wool coat off his shoulders and peeled back the blood-stiffened shirt. She sucked in a breath. The bullet had gouged a furrow across his ribs on the left side. It was angry and red, the edges jagged. It wasn't deep enough to hit an organ, but it was deep enough to be agony. "This will hurt," Clara whispered. "Do it," Eli said through gritted teeth. She uncorked the whiskey. She poured it onto the rag, the smell sharp and stinging in the small room. Then she pressed it to the wound. Eli's body convulsed. His head slammed back against the logs, a guttural sound tearing from his throat. His hands shot out, gripping her waist to anchor himself. His fingers dug into her flesh, not to hurt, but to hold on. Clara did not pull away. She held the rag firm, her other hand resting on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it hammering against his ribs, a frantic, terrified rhythm that betrayed the stoic mask he wore. He was shaking. Violent tremors ran through his large frame. "I have you," Clara whispered, stroking the hair back from his damp forehead. "I have you. Eli, breathe. Slowly." The tension left him. He slumped forward, his forehead resting on her shoulder. He breathed in ragged gasps, the scent of him filling her nose, sweat, blood, whiskey, and man. Beneath the muscle and the scar tissue, she felt his exhaustion. It was a bone-deep thing, a weariness born of years of running, of fighting, of being alone. "Thank you," he murmured into her neck. Clara closed her eyes, holding him. In that moment, she realized that this man, who had fought off 3 men and broken out of jail for her, was just as broken as she was. And that made her love him with a ferocity that terrified her. The days turned into a rhythm of survival. They were ghosts haunting the high country. Eli set snares for rabbits, his movements slow and careful as his side healed. Clara gathered firewood, limping through the trees, breaking dead branches until her hands were raw. They boiled coffee in a tin pot and ate roasted meat with their fingers, sitting by the fire as the wind howled outside like a grieving woman. They moved around each other in the small space with the familiarity of an old married couple. Yet there was a current of tension that hummed beneath the surface. It was the tension of 2 people who had stripped each other's souls bare but had not yet touched each other's bodies. It broke on the 4th night. A storm had rolled in at dusk, bringing heavy, wet snow. The temperature plummeted. They built the fire high, the flames throwing long, dancing shadows against the rough-hewn walls. Clara was sitting on a blanket by the hearth, mending a tear in Eli's shirt. Eli was cleaning his gun. The metallic click of the cylinder loud in the quiet room. He looked up. The firelight caught the curve of Clara's cheek, the line of her throat. She looked up and caught him watching her. The air in the room changed. It became heavy, charged. Eli set the gun down. He stood up and walked over to her. He did not ask. He did not hesitate. He knelt in front of her and took the needle and shirt from her hands, setting them aside. "Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. Clara looked at him. She saw the hunger in his eyes, not the predatory hunger of the men in town, but a desperate, worshipful need. A need to be close, to be held, to be known. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the scar on his jaw. "Yes," she whispered. He kissed her. It was not like the kiss in the stable, frantic and hurried. This was slow. It was a question and an answer all at once. His lips were rough, tasting of coffee, but his touch was agonizingly gentle. He lowered her back onto the blanket. His weight settled over her, heavy and warm, shielding her from the cold, from the world, from the past. When he touched her skin, Clara did not flinch. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like something being taken. She felt like she was giving a gift and receiving one in return. She arched into him, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. Their loving was not soft. It was raw. It was honest. It was a collision of two lonely people trying to merge into one, trying to erase the scars of their pasts with the friction of their bodies. There were tears, hers and his, mixed with sweat and the heat of the fire. Eli buried his face in her neck, making sounds that were half prayer, half sob. He worshipped her. He touched her with a reverence that made Clara want to weep. He made her feel holy. And afterward, as they lay tangled together under the buffalo robe, listening to the wind scream outside, Clara felt a peace she had never known. She was a sinner in the eyes of the church. She was a runaway wife. She was an adulteress, but lying in Eli's arms, feeling his heart beat against her back, she knew she had never been more pure. But peace in the wilderness is a fragile thing. Reality began to seep back in through the cracks in the cabin walls. Food was running low. The rabbit snares were coming up empty more often than not. The coffee tin was light. And guilt, that patient creditor, came collecting. Clara would watch Eli sleeping and think of Milton. Not with love, she had never loved him, but with a gnawing sense of responsibility. She had left him to face the town's ridicule alone. She had stolen his money. She had broken a vow made before God. "You are a fallen woman," a voice in her head whispered. It sounded like Mrs. Gable. It sounded like the Reverend. Eli had his own ghosts. The nightmares came for him in the gray hours of the morning. He would thrash in his sleep, crying out names Clara didn't know. "Sarah, Beth, no, no, no." Clara would wake to find him shaking, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cold. She would wrap her arms around him, rocking him like a child. "It's just a dream." "Eli," she would whisper, "you are here. You are with me." He would wake with a gasp, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring at the fire as if he saw a burning roof beam. "I can't save them," he would choke out, his voice thick with 10 years of grief. Every time, "Clara, I can't lift the beam. You are not there," Clara would soothe, kissing his temple. "You are here. You are a good man. Eli Mercer, you are more than the worst thing that happened to you." He would cling to her then, his grip desperate, as if she were the only solid thing in a world of smoke. But Clara could feel the rage simmering under his skin, hot and dangerous. He wanted to hurt the world that had hurt him. He wanted to burn it down. 2 weeks passed. The snow was deep now, drifting against the cabin door. "We cannot stay here much longer," Eli said one evening, poking at the dying embers of the fire. "The game is moving down to the valley. We will starve if we stay." Clara looked up from the pan where she was scraping the last of the cornmeal. "Where do we go?" "West," Eli said, "over the pass. If we can make it to the railhead in Idaho, we can disappear." "Disappear," Clara repeated. The word tasted flat. "It means leaving everything," Eli said, looking at her. "It means you never see your mother again. It means you are always looking over your shoulder." "I have been looking over my shoulder my whole life," Clara said quietly. But the next day, the illusion of escape was shattered. Clara was outside, gathering snow to melt for water, when she heard it. Crack. It was distant, rolling off the canyon walls like a stone falling. Then another. Crack. Gunshots. She dropped the bucket. She ran back into the cabin. "Eli," she gasped. "Someone is shooting. Down in the valley." Eli grabbed his rifle and moved to the door, cracking it open just an inch. He listened. The shots were faint, but distinct. "Hunters?" "Maybe," Clara suggested hopefully. Eli shook his head grimly. "Not that many shots. That is a skirmish, or target practice." He looked at her, his face hard. "It is Red Butte men. They are patrolling the foothills. They haven't given up." "Clara." Clara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "They are looking for us." "Maybe," Eli said. "Or maybe they are just marking their territory, reminding everyone who owns this land." That afternoon, a traveler passed on the trail below the cabin. He was an old prospector with a mule, muttering to himself, unaware of the eyes watching him from the timber. Eli slipped down the slope, moving silent as smoke. until he was close enough to the man's campfire to hear him talking to his mule. "Damn fools in that town," the prospector grumbled, spitting into the fire, Asa Briggs strutting around like a peacock, saying he is going to catch the runaway bride and put her to work in the cribs. Says he will hang the cowboy from the church steeple as a lesson. Eli froze. He listened as the man continued. Towns eating it up, saying the girl was trash anyway. Stole from her husband. Whore who ran off with a murderer. Briggs has got them all convinced he is the hero cleaning up the mess. Eli crept back up the hill. When he entered the cabin, his face was a mask of stone. He told Clara what he had heard. Clara sat on the edge of the bunk, her hands clenched in her lap. She listened to the lies Asa was spinning. She heard how her name was being dragged through the mud, how Eli was being painted as a monster. She thought of the women in town, the ones who whispered, yes, but also the ones who looked at the ground when Asa walked by. She thought of the girls who worked in the saloon, eyes dead and empty. She thought of Milton, weak and pathetic, crushed under a boot he helped polish. Something inside Clara snapped. It was not a break. It was a setting of bone. She stood up. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry and burning. "I am not running," she said. Eli looked at her. "Clara, if we go back, we fight, and if we fight, we might die." "I am already dead to them," Clara said, her voice rising. "They have killed my name. They have killed my reputation. Now they want to kill my spirit. If we run to Idaho, Eli, we are just letting them win. We are letting Asa Briggs write the story." She walked over to him, grabbing his arms. "He said he would put me in the cribs. Eli, he said he would hang you. Do you think he will stop with us? He will do it to the next girl, and the next family who won't sell their water rights." Eli looked away, his jaw working. "I know." "Then why are we hiding?" Clara demanded. "You told me you wanted to take the town with you. Well, I am ready." Eli looked back at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, a reflection of the fire that had consumed his life 10 years ago. But this was different. This wasn't a fire that destroyed. It was a fire that cleansed. He reached out and touched her face. "You want to go back?" he asked softly. "Into the lion's den?" "I want to burn the den down," Clara said. Eli closed his eyes for a moment. He felt the weight of the decision. It was madness. It was suicide. 2 people against a town owned by a tyrant. But then he remembered the smell of smoke in Kansas. He remembered Asa's smirk in the store. He remembered the bruise on Clara's cheek. He opened his eyes. They were dark and calm. "We will not just go back," he said. "We will bring the truth with us. And we will bring hell." "How?" Clara asked. Eli walked to the corner and picked up his rifle. He checked the action, sliding around into the chamber with a lethal, metallic clack. "Asa thinks he owns the law," Eli said, "but he keeps records. Men like that always do. They keep ledgers of who owes what, who they paid off. If we can get those books, we can expose him," Clara finished, catching his thought. "We can show the town what he really is. And then," Eli said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "we finish it." He looked around the cabin, their sanctuary, their home. He knew they would never see it again. "Pack what you can carry," he said. "We leave at dusk." Clara moved to gather their meager belonging. She folded the blanket. She put the tin cup in the saddlebag. She felt a strange, vibrating energy in her limbs. She was terrified. Yes, but for the first time since she had boarded that train in Philadelphia, she was not a victim. She was a weapon. As the sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long purple shadows over the snow, Clara and Eli mounted the bay horse. The animal was rested, its breath huffing white in the cold air. Eli swung up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He held the reins in one hand and his rifle in the other. "Ready?" he asked, his lips against her ear. Clara looked down the mountain, toward the distant, invisible smear of Red Butte. "Yes," she said. They turned the horse's head downhill, leaving the silence of the high country for the noise and the fury of the world below. They rode not as lovers fleeing a scandal, but as avenging angels descending to judge the wicked. And in their hearts, they carried a match that would set the whole rotten structure ablaze. The descent from the mountains was a journey into the throat of the dark. Clara and Eli moved under the cover of a moonless night, guiding the bay horse down dry creek beds where the stones rattled like dry bones under iron-shod hooves. They avoided the main road, sticking to deer trails that wound through the sagebrush, the scent of dust and resin heavy in the cooling air. When the smudge of Red Butte finally appeared in the distance, it looked small and insignificant, a cluster of shadows huddled in the shallow valley. It did not look like a place that held the power to destroy lives. Yet as Clara watched the distant flicker of lanterns, she felt a phantom weight on her chest. "We are here," Eli said quietly, pulling the horse to a stop in a copse of cottonwoods near the dry riverbed. He dismounted and tied the horse. He checked his rifle, the metal clicking softly in the gloom. He looked at Clara. His face was a landscape of shadows, but his eyes were clear. "This is the point of no return. Clara," he said, "once we step into that light, there is no going back to the mountains." "I know," Clara replied. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly inside her coat. She was terrified, but the fear was different now. It was not the paralyzing dread of a trapped animal. It was the adrenaline of a soldier before the charge. "I am ready." They moved into the outskirts of the town like ghosts. Their first stop was not the sheriff's office or the saloon, but the small, leaning shack behind the livery stable where Tom Halloway lived. Tom was a former deputy, a man who had lost his badge and his bottle of courage 2 years ago when he tried to investigate the mysterious fire at the Double Bar Ranch. He opened the door to Eli's knock, a shotgun in his hand, his eyes bleary. When he saw who stood on his porch, his jaw dropped. "Mercer," Tom hissed, lowering the gun. "You are a dead man walking. The whole territory is looking for you. We need your help." "Tom," Clara said, stepping into the light. She told him their plan. She spoke of the ledgers, of Asa's corruption, of the women in the saloon. Tom listened, rubbing his unshaven jaw. He looked at Eli, then at Clara. "You are asking for a war," Tom said. "We are asking for justice," Eli corrected. Tom spat on the ground. Then he nodded. "I still have my badge in a drawer somewhere. Maybe it is time I polished it." From there, they moved through the shadows to the back door of the saloon. Clara slipped inside, finding Maggie, a girl of no more than 19 with tired eyes and a bruised arm, washing glasses in the scullery. Maggie had been promised a job as a seamstress, only to find herself trapped in Asa's debt, forced to work the upstairs rooms. When Clara spoke to her, whispering in the dim light of the back room, Maggie began to weep. She promised to gather the other women. She promised they would be ready. Next was Mr. Henderson, a rancher who had lost his herd to a rigged poker game and now swept floors at the hotel. He listened to Eli with a grim satisfaction, his hands clenching into fists. "We are building an army of ghosts," Eli murmured as they met back in the alley. "It is a fragile alliance," Clara said, "but it is all we have." While Eli went to secure the perimeter near the saloon, Clara walked alone to the church. The building was dark, the door unlocked. She slipped inside. The air smelled of old hymnals and beeswax. Reverend Thorne was kneeling at the altar, his head bowed. "Reverend," Clara said. The man jumped, spinning around. He squinted into the darkness. "Mrs. Crane?" Clara walked down the aisle. Her boots echoed on the wood, the same wood where she had slipped and Eli had caught her. "I am not Mrs. Crane," she said. "I am Clara Hayes, and I have a question for you." The Reverend stood up, smoothing his cassock. "You should not be here. The sheriff, he will arrest you. You are a fugitive. I am a woman who was sold in your town," Clara said, her voice ringing off the rafters. "You preach about sin, Reverend. You preach about the sanctity of marriage. But you watched my husband sell me to Asa Briggs to pay a gambling debt. And you said nothing. That is not—" "I did not know," the Reverend stammered, backing away. "You knew," Clara said, advancing on him. You know what happens in those rooms above the saloon. You know how Asa takes the land from the ranchers. You know who really runs this town. And you take his money for your building fund, and you look the other way." She stopped at the foot of the altar. "Tonight, the truth comes out." She said, "You have a choice. Reverend, you can serve God, or you can serve Asa Briggs, but you cannot serve both. When the fire comes, make sure you are standing on the right side of it." She turned and walked out, leaving him standing in the silence, staring at the cross that hung above him. Judging his silence, Eli moved across the roof of the saloon with the grace of a mountain cat. The noise from below was deafening. A piano clanking out a frantic tune. Men shouting, the clinking of glass. It was the night of the town social, a gathering Asa had organized to celebrate the telegraph line and, unofficially, to gloat about his impending capture of the fugitives. Eli found the window to Asa's private office. It was latched, but the wood was rotten. He used his knife to slide the bolt back. He slipped inside. The room smelled of expensive cigars and leather. He went straight to the desk. It was locked. Eli didn't bother picking it this time. He used the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and smashed the lock. Wood splintered. He pulled the drawers open. There, stacked in neat rows, were the ledgers. Eli opened the top one. His eyes scanned the columns. It was all there. The bribes to Sheriff Brady listed as security fees. The loans given to ranchers with interest rates that guaranteed foreclosure. The payments from the railroad syndicate. And at the bottom of the stack, he found a leather-bound folio. He opened it. Inside were land deeds, dozens of them. And there, near the middle, was a deed for a homestead in Kansas. The name on the deed was Eli Mercer. Eli's hand shook as he touched the paper. This was the proof. This was the motive. Asa had not just been an enforcer. He had been the architect. He had ordered the fire that killed Sarah and Beth so he could claim the water rights and sell them to the railroad. A cold, white rage settled over Eli. He closed the book and shoved it into his satchel along with the ledgers. He went to the window. Down in the street, he saw Clara walking toward the front doors of the saloon. She looked small against the looming building, but she walked with her head high. He checked his gun. It was time. The saloon was packed. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Asa Briggs stood on a crate near the bar, holding a glass of whiskey, holding court. "And when we catch them," he was saying, his voice booming, "we will show this territory that law and order means something in Red Butte. We will not have thieves and whores running wild." The door swung open. The wind from the street blew into the room, swirling the sawdust on the floor. Clara stood in the doorway. She wore her travel-stained dress, her hair braided back, her face scrubbed clean of the mud but not the bruises. The room went silent. The piano player stopped mid-chord. "You speak a lot about law." "Asa," Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but in the sudden silence, it carried to every corner of the room. Asa stared at her. For a moment, he looked like he had seen a ghost. Then, his face twisted into a sneer. Well, he said. "The prodigal wife returns. Come to beg for mercy." "Clara, I came to tell the truth," Clara said. She walked into the room. The crowd parted for her, men stepping back as if she were made of fire. She stopped in the center of the room. She looked at the faces around her, the men who had mocked her, the women who had shunned her. "My name is Clara," she said. "I came here promised a home. Instead, I was treated as livestock. You all saw it. You saw Milton humiliate me. You saw him treat me like a servant. But you didn't see what happened in the dark." She pointed a shaking finger at Asa. "This man," she said, "agreed to take me as payment for a gambling debt. He sent his men to drag me to his rooms. He intended to force me to work in this saloon until I had paid off $500. That is not law. That is slavery. Liar!" Asa shouted. "She is hysterical. She is trying to cover up her affair with the outlaw. She is telling the truth." The voice came from the back. It was Maggie. She stepped forward, followed by 3 other women from the upstairs rooms. "He did the same to me," Maggie said, her voice trembling. "My father owed him money. Asa said I could work it off. That was 3 years ago. The debt never goes down. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Men looked at each other. The veneer of civilization was cracking. Asa's face turned purple. "Sheriff," he roared. "Arrest them! Arrest them all!" Sheriff Brady stepped forward, his hand on his gun. "That is enough." He barked. "Not yet," a voice growled from the balcony. Everyone looked up. Eli Mercer stood on the railing of the second floor. He held a stack of books in one hand and his Colt in the other. He threw the ledgers down. They landed on the floor with heavy thuds. Spilling open, "Read them," Eli shouted. "It is all there, the fixed games, the stolen deeds, the bribes that bought your sheriff's badge. Mr. Henderson, the ruined rancher, lunged forward and grabbed a book." He flipped through the pages. "By God," he shouted. "It is here. He marked the deck on the night I lost the herd. It is written right here." The room erupted. "Take him," Asa screamed at his men. "Kill him." Sheriff Brady drew his gun and fired at the balcony. The bullet splintered the railing next to Eli's leg. Eli returned fire, shooting the gun out of Brady's hand. Chaos swallowed the room. Men dove for cover. Tables were overturned. In the confusion, one of Asa's hired thugs, a man named Silas who had recovered from their last fight, lunged at Clara. Eli saw him. He leaped from the balcony, landing on Silas with a bone-crushing impact. As they fought, Silas flailed backward, crashing into a table filled with kerosene lanterns. The lanterns shattered. The oil sprayed across the floor, soaking into the dry sawdust, the wood, the overturned chairs. The wick of a broken lantern touched a puddle of oil. Whoosh! A wall of fire leaped up, separating the room in two. "Fire!" someone screamed. The saloon was old wood, dried by years of desert wind and soaked in spilled alcohol. It went up like kindling. The flames licked up the curtains, racing toward the ceiling. "Get out!" Eli roared, shoving Clara toward the door. "I am not leaving you!" she screamed back, coughing in the sudden, acrid smoke. "Get the women out!" Eli commanded. "Go!" Clara looked at the terrified women huddled near the bar. She grabbed Maggie's arm. "Move!" she shouted. "Everyone out!" She herded the women and the bewildered townsfolk toward the doors. The heat was already blistering. The fire was roaring now, a sound like a freight train. Asa Briggs was trying to slip out the back way. Eli saw him. He saw the man who had burned his life to ash trying to escape the flames he had created. "No," Eli growled. He vaulted over a burning table, cutting off Asa's escape. Asa turned, a knife in his hand, his eyes wide with terror. "Stay back," Asa shrieked. Eli walked through the smoke. The heat was searing his face, singing his hair. He didn't feel it. He only saw the face of the man who had killed his family. "You like fire, Asa," Eli said. "Now you get to see how it feels." Asa lunged. Eli caught his wrist. They grappled, stumbling against the bar. The mirror behind the bar shattered from the heat. It was not a clean fight. It was two desperate men clawing at each other in an inferno. Asa kicked Eli in the bad side, sending a spike of agony through him. Eli grunted and drove his knee into Asa's stomach. Asa fell back, coughing. The ceiling above them groaned, the main support beam, eaten through by the flames, gave way. Eli saw it coming. He rolled to the side. Asa looked up. He screamed. The burning timber crashed down, pinning Asa to the floor. The floorboards beneath him gave way, and he fell into the cellar, the burning debris raining down on top of him. Eli staggered back, shielding his face. The heat was unbearable. The air was gone, replaced by choking black smoke. He turned to run, but his legs wouldn't work. The smoke was filling his lungs. He fell to his knees. "Eli!" A hand grabbed his collar. He looked up through the haze. Clara was there. She had wrapped her shawl around her face. She was coughing, her eyes streaming tears, but she was pulling him. "Get up!" she screamed. "Get up! Damn you!" Eli forced himself to his feet. He leaned on her. Together, they stumbled toward the light of the door. They burst out into the street just as the roof of the saloon collapsed inward, sending a geyser of sparks into the night sky. The wind caught the sparks. It carried them to the general store next door, then to the livery stable, then to the sheriff's office. The town of Red Butte, built of pine and greed, began to die. By dawn, the wind had died down, leaving a silence that was heavy and absolute. Red Butte was gone. The main street was a charred scar in the earth. Chimneys stood like tombstones among the ashes. The iron safe from the bank sat in a pile of blackened rubble. The survivors were gathered on the ridge overlooking the valley. There were no casualties among the innocents. Clara and the women had seen to that. But the town itself, the structure of it, was erased. A plume of dust on the horizon announced the arrival of the authorities. Federal marshals, accompanied by a troop of cavalry, rode into the valley. They had been summoned 3 days prior by a telegram sent from the next town over, sent by Reverend Thorne, who had finally found his conscience. The marshals found a group of bedraggled survivors and a pile of ledgers that had been saved from the fire. The investigation took 3 days. They set up tents on the edge of the burn. Sheriff Brady was arrested within the hour, the ledgers providing damning proof of his corruption. The surviving members of Ace's gang were rounded up. Then came the question of Eli Mercer. He sat in the marshal's tent, his hands bandaged, his face clean but scarred. "You started the fire," the marshal said, a stern man with a gray mustache. "I did not," Eli said calmly, "but I did not stop it. You broke into the saloon. You assaulted the sheriff. You are a wanted man." "Mercer, I am," Eli admitted. But then the witnesses came. First Clara, who spoke with a quiet, fierce eloquence about the kidnapping attempt. Then Maggie, who showed her scars. Then Mr. Henderson. And finally, Reverend Thorne, who testified that Eli Mercer had saved the town from a rot that was far worse than the fire. The marshal listened. He looked at the ledgers. He looked at the deed to Eli's Kansas farm, proving the prior crimes of Asa Briggs. In the end, justice in the West was a pragmatic thing. The marshal stood before Eli and Clara on the 4th morning. "Eli Mercer," he said, reading from a paper, "the charges of arson and murder are dropped due to mitigating circumstances and self-defense. However, you are a disturber of the peace and a vigilante. This territory cannot abide men who take the law into their own hands." He looked at Eli. "You are sentenced to permanent exile from the Wyoming Territory. You have 24 hours to cross the border. If you return, you will hang. It was a mercy. It was a life. And Clara," the marshal continued, turning to her, "your husband, Milton Crane, was found 2 towns over, trying to board a train with stolen money. He has confessed to conspiracy and fraud. Your marriage is annulled by the territory. You are a free woman." Clara let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for a year. She looked at Eli. He was looking at the ground, his shoulders shaking slightly. They stood on the edge of the valley, where the sagebrush began its march toward the mountains. The air smelled of wet ash and rain. Their horses were packed. They had nothing but what they carried in their saddlebags and the clothes on their backs. Eli looked at the ruins of Red Butte. "It is gone," he said softly. "It is," Clara agreed. He turned to her. He looked at her with that same weary, intense gaze she had seen on the first day in the stagecoach. "I have to go." "Clara," he said, "the order says I have to leave." "I know," she said. He hesitated. He took his hat off, turning it in his hands. "You are free now," he said. "You can go back east. You can find your mother. You can find a decent man who hasn't spent half his life in a jail cell or on the run. You don't have to come with me. I have nothing to offer you but a saddle and a long road." Clara looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear that she would finally come to her senses and leave him. She reached out and took his scarred hand in hers. She felt the roughness of his skin, the tremor that still lingered there. "Eli," she said. She looked at the ashes of the town. "I walked through fire for you," she said. "Literally. Do you really think I did that just to say goodbye?" She squeezed his hand. "We were both bought," she said. "We were both mocked. We were both nearly destroyed by this place. But we chose each other. That is the only thing that matters. I don't want a decent man. Eli, I want you." Eli looked at her, and the fear in his eyes broke, replaced by a light that was brighter than the sun on the snow. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. Clara looked west, toward the line of blue hills that marked the border of Idaho. The land there was vast and empty. It was harsh, it was unpredictable, but it was free. "Anywhere," she said. "As long as you are there." Eli smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. He put his hat back on. "Let's ride," he said. They mounted their horses. They did not look back at Red Butte. They turned their faces toward the blue hills and the wide, open sky. They rode side by side, two broken people who had burned down their cages and found, in the ashes, a love that was strong enough to build a new world. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope the journey of Clara and Eli resonated with you. It has been a privilege to share this tale of resilience, justice, and love with you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below letting me know where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West so you never miss a new adventure. And finally, I invite you to share your thoughts on the ending. Did justice find its way to Red Butte? What do you think the future holds for Clara and Eli beyond the Blue Hills? Thank you for your time, and safe travels on your own trails.